ever checked the calendar and felt overwhelmed by all the racing from F1 and F2 all the way to all the different F4 series? Well, I might just have a solution for you. Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. 11 single-seater series in 1 week may be a lot to cover, but I have tried my best to sum up all the most relevant talking points so you can stay up to date with global feeder series racing, so let's get to it. The Formula 2 title fight is finally getting closer to its conclusion, with the number of proper title contenders now reduced to, well, let's call it 3.5, shall we? Leo Fornaroli may have made a little mistake on Sunday, but still continued his consistent scoring streak to keep a pretty comfy gap going into the final 2 rounds. But Jack Crawford will be coming into those rounds with big momentum, with a neat sprint and an excellent feature win to his name here. I don't know how he managed to hang on ahead of Dirksen without even defending all that much, but it was great to watch. We know third-year drivers tend to get overlooked by the F1 teams, but Crawford is having a phenomenal season, showing both great pace and maturity to his craft. And don't forget, he's still the same age as most of his rookie competition. Invicta may be the team to beat, but Crawford, I think, is looking like the most well-rounded driver this year. Luke Browning has secured big points in the sprint, but kinda fucked it on Sunday. With how mediocre his mid-season portion was, I am almost surprised to see Browning this high up in the title battle anyway, to be entirely honest. High Tech has to be considered more of an outside bet between the 3 proper title contenders though, I'm afraid. They really aren't living up to the huge 2024 they've had. Meanwhile, Richard Verschoor does still have an outside chance at the title, but much like I predicted before the season, I don't think MP has what it takes to properly fight for the title with him, unfortunately. Dino Bogdanovic has finally hit the top step of the podium in dominant fashion on Saturday, and I couldn't be any happier about it. My pre-season favourite for the title has of course been let down by the engine early in the year, and a little bit by both High Tech and himself, but this weekend he has finally shown that magnificent form from his late season debut. Again, proper impressive drives, not just to win the sprint, but also charge to the podium in the feature. With how mixed the teams were this weekend, it felt like a proper driver's track, and Bogdanovic certainly made the most of that. It may not be particularly likely, but I kinda hope both him and Browning stay for another year. I have a feeling that duel might swing the other way if we get a rematch. Talking about people making the most of drivers' tracks, Gabriele Mini has once again impressed at Baku, much like he did during his cameo last season. He may have just missed out on a podium thanks to Prema's atrocious tyre wear, but at least he could briefly flash that raw skill we all know he's got. I don't know where Mini's career is going to go from here, being an Alpine junior and all, but he is one of the characters that absolutely deserves to be in a title contending car, I reckon. Imagine if he was in that second DAMS instead of Kushmaini, for example. And we do of course need to look at our newcomers, F3 graduates Martinius Stenshorne and Laurens van Eupen, replacing Trident drivers Semi Migatunov and Max Esterson. We had this conversation in the comments last week about how many of Trident's issues were down to the car and how many to the drivers. Well, let's just say Stenshorne did manage to make the team look considerably better, even with a mechanical on Saturday, and an incident on Sunday meant he has no results to show for it. Podium pace on debut in the Trident at a tricky track like Baku, which he was racing for his first time. That is one hell of a weekend for the young Norwegian. But remember how I just said it very much felt like a driver's track this weekend? Considering how anonymous Van Eupen looked, something totally fine for a late season debut by the way, I don't think we can reasonably conclude that Trident was great all along. I think Stenshorne just really clicked. I can already feel him becoming my next Bogdanovic in terms of predictions for next year. Formula 1 has produced some crazy results this weekend, but to be honest, I can't help but feel a little robbed. With both McLaren starting out of position, the stage looked set for a charging battle between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris to see who can make up the most lost ground. Instead, with Piastri putting it in a wall early on, that anticipated battle was over before it really began. Yeah, sure, nice for the championship and all, but still a little underwhelming. And Norris didn't even manage to really use this opportunity to close the points gap anyway. All around, a bit of a wasted opportunity. At the front, we did of course get to watch some classic Verstappen brilliance, but there's no doubt that the real story was Carlos Sainz keeping his Williams ahead of a slightly disappointing Kimi Antonelli to take the team's first podium since that rainy day in Spa in 2021, and I'm pretty sure the first podium on merit since Valtteri Bottas. Sainz may have needed a few races to get to grips with the Williams, but has since risen back to being a proper star in the midfield, and not gonna lie, I did enjoy him adding insult to injury by setting foot on the podium before Hamilton. It is almost a shame we'll get a new regulation next season, just when so many teams have clearly had a bit of a breakthrough in terms of their development this year. We can keep the Euro Cup 3 segment somewhat short, but there was a couple key developments. Most notably, recently signed Red Bull Junior Mattia Colnaghi has fulfilled the prophecy by taking the title in style with a round to spare. The Italian rookie was truly untouchable all year and will rival Freddie Slater next season as the hottest F3 prospect on paper, though don't get me wrong, I still rate Slater even higher. In general, I thought it was a fun development that Red Bull signed 3 high profile drivers on this grid going into the season. Noticed none of them were going to win the title and instead just signed Colnaghi as well. Red Bull may be ruthless with their expectations, but you can't say they aren't giving out a lot of chances. Speaking of Red Bull Juniors, Enzo Tomvanichkul has finally secured his first win, not just in the series, but in single-seaters period. I've said it in the past that I feel like the Thai is being rushed up the ladder a bit needlessly from a very early karting graduation just as he was finding his feet in the seniors to a promising but not exactly refined rookie season in F4 last year. And while I stand by that, this drive really showed his ability to deal with those expectations adequately. He may not be a frontrunner, but he's consistently improving. I'd assume if he's rushed to F3 in 2026, we'll see a similar story there. Far from a title threat, but the occasional breakout drive, the talent is clearly there. The FRECA title battle literally could not be any closer with 2 rounds to spare, as Fast Freddie Slater and Matteo de Palo now both find themselves at 226 points going into the final 2 rounds of the season. God, I am so glad I'll get to watch this bit of cinema unfold trackside at the Hockenheimring. I've went on and on all season about how I don't think Trident will keep it up enough to put De Palo in the title fight until the end, but with only 4 races left to go, that has largely turned out to be fake news from my side. The team is really doing a fantastic job, as could be seen by none other than Bhakti also scoring a P5 in race 1. In many ways, the battles between Freddie Slater and De Palo delivered this weekend, fighting for the win in race 1 and Slater pulling off a critical double move to get ahead of De Palo in race 2. We may have slightly criticised his racecraft earlier in the year, but he has since absolutely cleaned up his act on that aspect as well. Funnily enough, Enzo Dellini and Pedro Claro are also both on 198 points each, mostly due to an unfortunate lap 1 incident for Dellini on Saturday. Horrible timing for his first DNF of the season, but not all hope is lost just yet. Arguably, given RSGP's track record this season, Dellini still has quite good odds to beat the other title contenders in the upcoming individual races. Whether that will be enough for the title, of course, remains to be seen, but I'm absolutely not ready to count out the former Red Bull Junior just yet. Title battle aside, this weekend was almost a bit too calm if I'm honest. Sure, I could dick on Jack Beaton some more, but honestly we've done that enough already, I reckon. I really hope he has a Kamara-esque glow up next year. Instead, let's briefly shout out French F4 champion Tito Carter for the best attacking drive of the weekend on Sunday, pulling off quite a few overtakes to work his way into the points paying positions. ART may be a huge disappointment, but we should consistently remind ourselves how good both Gilter and Carter really are. Believe it or not, the title battle in the American edition of the Formula Regional is still insanely tight with 1 round to go and just keeps having twists and turns as well. This time, Titus Sherlock has been repaid by the universe for his horrible luck early in the year, as both his title rivals had relatively poor weekends. The cruelest part was certainly the engine failure from former championship leader Bruno Ribeiro. But it wasn't all about luck by any means. Sherlock did also overtake Ribeiro on the road in race 2 to now find himself leading the title battle, I think for the first time since Road America, everything to play for the lead trio at Barber. But none of our title protagonists actually won this weekend. Instead, Christian Brooks made his debut in the series and immediately went on to more or less dominate both races. Of course, Brooks is used to fast cars, having done both the USF Pro 2000s and a reasonably successful half-season in Indy Next last year, before evidently running out of budget for the time being. I believe this was his first time racing this season actually. So in that sense, a very pleasing result, as Brooks certainly made the most of his return behind the wheel. Euroformula Open also managed to keep a relatively open championship battle heading into the last round, with Timmy Koharczyk now back in the lead ahead of Michael Shin and Ivan David, mostly thanks to a puncture in race 1 for Shin. This championship is really confusing at times, I will admit. I still feel pretty comfortable with my assessment that Koharczyk and David are the strongest drivers on the grid, and with a bit of a gap as well, I reckon. But somehow it does not translate into any kind of consistency for either driver. At least we know David has little to lose with his F3 seat already confirmed, so while he is my personal favourite of the grid, I am kinda rooting for Koharczyk now. Guy definitely deserves a shot in F3 as well, and should have been there this season already in my opinion. A brief shout out for debutant Teo Mikuris, a driver usually driving an LMP3 in the Michelin Le Mans Cup. I don't know what this cameo was all about, but what I do know is that it was pretty successful. A P2 in tricky conditions and otherwise just as well established in the midfield as all the other drivers. Might not be the most encouraging sign for the grid overall, but I'm sure Mikuris must be quite pleased with himself. And with that, we'll leave the fast cars behind and continue with a special F4 segment. Onto our sizable F4 segment, where we begin with Italian F4. The weekend might have been shortened to only 2 proper races, thanks to perfect boat racing conditions on Sunday afternoon, but nevertheless it did produce some interesting results, particularly in the midfield. At the sharp end, things have looked more or less how they have all year. Kean Nakamura-Berta is the man to beat, and Gabriel Gomez and Sebastian Weldon taking turns as his main challengers. Gomez did succeed in that department on Sunday, although slightly aided by the late safety car. With another DNF to Gomez's name and only a handful races to go, K&B absolutely has a hand on the trophy already though. Instead, after ignoring her admittedly forgettable performance all season, we can highlight Emily Cotti. She may have still just missed out on scoring a point, but has managed to beat RSGP teammate Alex Powell totally on merit in the second race. I thought that was both surprising and rather impressive to see, to be honest. And in a rough season like the one she is having, I'm sure even that small success means a lot. Maybe something is finally clicking for Cotti in F4, definitely hoping she'll stay in a decent team for a second season in 2026. In a similar fashion, we couldn't do this segment without mentioning the first ever points for Andrea Dupe after I called him out last weekend. And while a single P9 does not change the generally underwhelming trajectory, at least this puts him in the Bondarev tier of decent but still getting smoked by your teammates bracket of Prema drivers. But of course, we were expecting a lot more from Bondarev than from Dupe in the first place, still hoping to learn about some sort of crippling engine issue for the Ukrainian here. And finally, a shout out for Max Popov for finally finding his form again with a podium on Sunday. The Van Amersfoort Racing ace driver has had a really rough middle portion of the season, so I am glad to see him back at the sharp end where he belongs. Man, this series is mad competitive if you stop to think about all the great drivers who don't even get to fight near the front. Over in the second most competitive F4 series, in Spanish F4, Campos ace Thomas Strauven still finds himself running away with the championship despite a rough weekend for his incredibly high standards. Yes, a P9 somehow is his second worst result of the season, if you can believe that. Nevertheless, the battle for P2 is alive and well. We've got supposed MP ace and former European karting champion René Lammers, his rookie teammate Ean Eyckmans, who has finally taken his first win after half a dozen second places and might well be the most exciting prospect to come out of this series, and second man at Campos, Jan Przowski. The Pole had a particularly shitty time thanks to stalling it twice at the start, but still remains in the hunt for P2 as well. I will add though that Lammers once again ended up losing a win with an unnecessary penalty. His results never quite tell the full story. While there are maybe more mistakes than you'd hope for in his second season, this is of course still incredibly early in everybody's car racing careers, so that'll likely get sorted out sooner or later. For Lammers, all the ingredients for a future contender higher up the ladder are clearly there already. Frontrunners aside, this weekend also looked rather familiar on the rest of the grid if I'm honest. Unlike Italy and F4, the group of potential point scorers is relatively small in a regular race here. A couple of new faces did spark some interest though, namely Mikas Blaskos and Lewis Worrell. Worrell because he has had an excellent karting career, including a European Championship, and he has also been a close rival for former teammate Dries van Langendonk for a while. All in all, pretty high up on my list of exciting karting graduates this season, even if his stint in the seniors never really went anywhere. His debut here was nothing to write home about at all, but I am sure he'll get better quickly from here. Mikel Blaskos, meanwhile, is a guy I did not know at all, with fuck all results in karting, but he did hit the ground running in comparison. Really goes to show that karting is not everything. The British edition of Formula 4 has seen the late season debutants Dries van Langendonk and Kraling cool off a little, but meanwhile the fight rages on at the front. Now, not exactly for the title, Fionn McLaughlin really only needs to finish a race or two and he'll be crowned champ no matter what. The battle for P2 between Hungarian Martin Molnar and Australian, you can almost say F4 veteran Jimmy Pizik, rages on. Molnar I think has shown to be both the quicker but also somewhat more clumsy driver over the year, but with everything coming down to one last round, anything can happen. In Pizik's case, I just feel like if he had to stay in F4 for the third year, I don't know if finishing a distant second will even help him advance his career, but fingers crossed for him of course. The rest of our attention I want to give the surprise of the year. Tommy Harfield coming out of nowhere to fight at the front for Chris Dittman Racing of all the teams. And after scoring the team's first ever win in Donington last time, he has doubled up here with another win and P2. And let me tell you in case you've not seen it, the overtake he pulled off past McLaughlin for the win was incredible. Harfield really looks at home in these cars at the moment. Can't wait to see where his career will take him next. The Toyota Juniors managed to strike back in the Japanese F4 this time out, with Tokiya Suzuki winning 2 out of 3 head-to-head duels against championship leader Itsuki Sato. The pair was utterly unstoppable this weekend. Effectively, this now also means Ryo Shirazaki has more or less dropped out of the title battle, despite a decent pair of podiums. Japanese F4 really looks like a 2-horse race, and given the pretty sizable experience advantage for Sato, I reckon Tokiya Suzuki will leave this year as the most impressive driver no matter what. And finally, in the F4 USA, Connor Shipman continued to dominate the field and has now officially secured the title with 1 round to spare. That's what an untouchable 9-race winning streak will do to you, I guess. Not really a lot to say about this rather small grid other than that there's a clear cut between the top 5 and the rest most of the time. Particularly Alex Popov does have some really impressive drives at times. But that was finally all for this week from the single-seater department. But of course I couldn't leave you without our quick weekly karting report. Between the Champions of the Future Academy and the final round of 3 different high-profile national championships, it wasn't easy to choose what to talk about in this video. But I have gone with the DKM, the German Championship, as it is the only national championship I actually managed to keep up with over the year. The British one I always watch in the off-season. In the DMKM Mini Championship, I am absolutely delighted to report that Devin Titz has not only won the championship in his sophomore season, he has done it in style by winning every single final of the year to complete a perfect season. And he won most of those pretty comfortable as well, something almost unheard of in the minis. Long-time viewers might remember me introducing this kid towards the end of the DKM season last year, and I really could not be happier with his development. Now, I just hope he can find the budget to attack some sort of European campaign in 2026. I doubt Tits still has much to learn wiping the floor with kids in Germany. If you want to support that effort, they are looking to crowdfund his racing a bit, so go check that out if you're into that. The German Junior Championship DKM has been a tiny bit disappointing on the results front for me personally, with Mark-Alexander Reistrup taking the title ahead of Matteo Mason. Not to take anything away from the Dane, but I think the most exciting prospects were still further down the order. Most importantly, last year's mini dominator Milan Rossi and Maxim Becker, the two big German prospects on the grid. Particularly, Milan Rossi will absolutely return as the title favourite in 2026. And while the Scandinavian entries of 2024 Swedish champ Erik Poulsen and Gustav Christensen deserve a shout out as well, I'm incredibly happy to say that Martina Rumlanova beat both of them in the standings to take P5. We have talked about her OK Junior debut about a year ago, and she hit the ground running on that weekend as well, and has been consistently around the battle for the podium positions this season. Absolutely a fantastic performance from an emerging female star. There's only one big caveat for this championship. It is very hard to accurately rank, as there is currently zero overlap between these OK Junior runners and the European competition in the FIA or Champions of the Future, so we don't really know how good any of these drivers are just yet. The second tier of shifter karting, the DSKC, had a bit of a special guest this week, with DTM driver Ben Durr going back to the roots and competing well in the lead pack of this race until he had to retire with damage. Cool little guest appearance to add something extra to the weekend. Dutchman Jayden Teen has comfortably won the championship in his rookie season, and I sincerely hope this either kickstarts a career in car racing or sends him on the way to being an elite karting driver. Guy has been fantastic throughout his junior and senior stints and has not slowed down at all in the KZ2s, so try to remember the name Jayden Teen. Teen did have to settle for P3 in the final though, leaving the win to fellow Dutchman Jeffrey Fixer ahead of Matteo Prois. The latter had a surprisingly good season all around, I might add as well. And last but not least, in the top flight of German shifter karting, Danilo Albanese has taken the title for Kart Republic in rather dominant fashion, mostly thanks to some early season issues for rival and Formula K ace Marcus Kayak. The guy you may or may not know I was definitely rooting hard for. Guess he'll get his shot at revenge in the World Championship. At least one of his Formula K teammates won the final here in Wackersdorf, with Frenchman Emilien Denner dominating the race. The DKM truly features a lineup stacked with the world's shifter karting stars, but I still want to draw your attention to three youngsters in the series as well, all currently in their second year of shifter karting competition. Enzo Bol, Dion van Werven and Simon Rechenmacher. Van Werven probably had the best season of them all, taking P4 in the standings despite being disqualified on Sunday here for some outrageous driving standards, it has to be said. Rechenmacher may have had the most impressive performances, but also the worst luck, but is definitely also a guy to keep an eye on. Bol was only a guest starter this weekend, but did come third last year in the DSKC and has been rapid ever since he set foot in a shifter kart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your next generation of karting stars. It may have been a lot, but that was finally all for this week's episode. Next week we'll get some smaller bits and pieces across the world of F4 racing, while the headlines and my weekend will be dominated by the new OKNJ and OKN portion of the Karting World Championship, which I highly encourage you all to check out. Until then, it is your opportunity to share all of your thoughts and opinions down with us in the comments about all the madness from the past weekend, so we can get our lovely little discussion going. And otherwise, I really thank you all for watching, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.